then are they to call on him, in whom they have not believed? How are they to believe in him, whom they have not heard? And how are they to hear without a preacher? But how are they to preach unless they are sent? Just as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news.
Good morning, my wonderful, generous Roxbury family. I heard that we are going to start talking about Christmas in a couple of weeks, which seems really early, but it's actually perfect because our packing party for Operation Christmas Child is coming up on November 3rd. So we need to get ready for that. And first, I just want to tell all of you, thank you so much for your generosity, both in donations of items that you've purchased while you've been out and about thinking about OCC, and also donations in the offering. I really am so grateful for that. We could not do this ministry without you. We could not pack 500 boxes if not for your generosity. So I want to tell you thank you very much for all of your donations so far. That being said, we do have a few items that we're looking for to kind of round out our boxes, make sure that we have what we want in them. Those items include markers, pens, pencils, colored pencils, t-shirts, small stuffed animals like the wow items, those wow items. We're looking for those. Hair ties and toothbrushes. So those are the kind of immediate needs that we are looking for if you're wanting to specifically buy something. But that list is not exhaustive. There's lots of other things that you could buy to donate to this wonderful ministry. So please don't think those are the only things you can purchase. If you are looking for ideas, I will have a list of ideas out by the collection box, as well as this sample box that my wonderful daughter put together of just ideas that of things you can purchase. So she put in here a cross-stitch kit, one of those wow items. Remember, we want to have one of these in every box. First aid kit. She put in a cup with a pair of socks and a comb and a toothbrush, all sorts of different things in here that she did. And you can really make your box what you want. And so that's what's great about OCC, is that each box is different. So again, check out that list. There's also an Amazon list. If it says we've met our need for something on that list and you want to buy it anyways, go for it. It's not a specific list. It's just ideas. They also have a list on the Operation Christmas Child's website. It's an Amazon list. There's several different options to pick from there. And the only thing we would ask is that you not buy anything that has liquid or toothpaste or any like war items like knives, guns, that kind of thing, weapons. We can't send any of that. But other than that, go for it. Have fun shopping. We've just been so overwhelmed with all of the donations already. We are so grateful. Thank you so much for your support in this ministry. We could not do it without you. If you have any questions, please see myself, Deanna Pickering. You could also see Jesse Winky or Kim Hutchinson. We're tag teaming it this year. And then next year, the goal is that Deanna and I will take over and run this by ourselves. So hopefully we can handle that. Be patient with us with that. Please see us if you have any questions or if you would like to volunteer for packing party day. We could use your help with taking pictures, guiding people where they're supposed to go, helping people with their boxes, making sure there's letters in every box, etc. So again, thank you so much for your generosity, and I look forward to packing with you on November 3rd.
Morning. Wondered if you've heard this book. The title is The 10 Most Humble Men in the World and How I Chose the Other 9. Psalm 131 isn't such a book. It's just a short, humble little psalm. It's only 3 verses long. Great preacher Charles Spurgeon said it's one of the shortest psalms to read, but one of the longest to learn. So it's Psalm of David. We'll read it together. Lord, my heart is not proud. My eyes are not haughty. I don't concern myself with matters too great or too awesome for me to grasp. Instead, I have calmed and quieted myself like a weaned child who no longer cries for its mother's milk. Yes, like a weaned child is my soul within me. O Israel, O people of God, put your hope in the Lord now and always. Sunday school teacher had straight hair, decided to go for a perm, like a perm. Next Sunday morning, came to class, little Jack, 4 years old, looking at her, frowning. And she said, "Jack, are you okay?" He said, "It's your hair." She said, "Oh yes, this is called a perm, and I love it." And he said, "Have you seen it?" Years ago, I was reading a book to one of my grandsons, about the same age, 4. This is the picture that we're looking at, one of his dinosaur books. He looked at the picture, he looked at me, he said, "Grandpa, he looks just like you." So I sent him to his room. No, I didn't. It doesn't help to know that the name Pachycephalosaurus literally means thick-headed lizard, so that doesn't help either. You know, last Sunday, watching a certain game on TV, about 1:30, well, right at the end of the first half, knowing what I was preaching on this Sunday, I was thinking, it's going to be really hard to be humble. But then the second half happens, so there you are. So easy to shift, isn't it? In fact, apparently I was boasting a little bit at some point in the game, and my wife said, "Just keep it up, keep it up." You know, it says in the Bible, pride goes before a fall, so just keep it up. And sure enough, easily humbled, are we not? Humiliated, humbled, comes from the same source. Why is humility so elusive, so difficult, against the grain? I want you to think about this. You know, if you read in the New Testament at all, you read the Gospels, why are we tempted to feel superior or tempted to judge those 12 disciples when they're confused or competitive or selfish, as if we don't wrestle with the very same issues ourselves? You think early in Jesus' ministry, he purposefully taught these stories, kind of had double meanings or layered meanings, parables. And so the disciples were ever coming to him and kind of pulling him aside, said, "Rabbi, what in the world are you talking about here? What is with the seeds and the farmer and all of this?" And so he would lay it out. He would explain it and kind of say to them, you need to dig beneath the surface. Look a little deeper here, guys. That's what you need to do. No sooner, though, he says, "Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees." Do you remember this? Remember the disciples' response? "Did you bring the bread? I didn't bring the bread." Here's Jesus again. On his way to Jerusalem, last time, he tells them not once but 3 times that the Son of Man will be delivered into the hands of men, and they're going to kill him. They'll murder him. But on the 3rd day, he will rise. You know what it says of the disciples? But they didn't understand what he meant, and they're afraid to ask him about it. They didn't get it. Because obviously, they're thinking, he can't mean that, so this must be, again, one of these dig beneath the surface kind of things. And yet we know that he was just preparing them in advance. He was speaking quite literally. This is what's going to happen. In their mind, they're thinking, listen, number one, Messiahs don't die, they conquer, so he can't mean that, right? And resurrection, that happens at the end of time to everybody, not one man in the middle of history, so to speak. And besides, if he's really going to be murdered, I didn't sign up for that, But rather than risk opening themselves to a new, different, or a different way of understanding, looking at things, they just kind of go back to how they're wired and back to the familiar. And so we read another occasion, Mark 9. It says that after they arrived at Capernaum and settled in the house, Jesus asked his disciples, "What were you arguing about on the way, on the road?" It says they didn't answer. I imagine them kind of kicking the dirt, looking around their feet, because they were arguing about who was the greatest among them, kind of their favorite topic of discussion. And then it says he sat down. When a rabbi sits down, that means he's going to speak authoritatively, and so you need to listen. This is something you need to hear. And he called the 12 to himself, and he said, "Whoever wants to be first must take the last place and be the servant of everyone else." And then he put a little child among them, and taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Anyone who welcomes a little child like this one on my behalf welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me welcomes not only me, but the Father who sent me." Now you think, okay, the disciples, they finally get this, right? This is not the first time they've had this kind of teaching. Next verse. John comes to Jesus, says, "Rabbi, we saw someone using your name to cast out demons, but we told him to knock it off because he's not in our group." So he gets very personal, Matthew 18. Kind of same thing. Jesus calls a little child to him, puts the child among them, says, "Truly I tell you, unless you change," I'm not talking about others now, "unless you change and you become like a child, you can never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever becomes as humble as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." And the reason he takes this little child and makes an object lesson is not because they're cute and precious, because they occupied the low rung on the ladder in terms of status in that culture. He's saying that's the object lesson here. He's kind of flipping the scales. What's up is down, what's first is last, what's great is humble. You lose your life for the kingdom and you gain everything. And virtually every time that Jesus predicts his death, his humiliation, his suffering, as well as his resurrection, he then says to his disciples, "If you're going to follow me, this is the way I'm going. So you deny yourself. You take up your cross daily and follow me," because this is not just the entrance into the kingdom, servanthood. It is the way of the kingdom. This is the life that I've lived. And so, even as I've come not to be served, but to serve, so if you follow. And the disciples are scratching their head once again. But we do too, don't we? How easy is it for you to listen maybe to God saying something new to you, some new understanding that goes against your grain, it goes against your selfishness, it goes against culture. How easy is it for you to latch onto that? Or how quick are you to open your heart, your wallet, your time in service to someone, even though that offering that you give is going to go unnoticed, unappreciated, maybe not even reciprocated? Someone has said that servanthood is great until somebody treats you like a servant. At a leadership conference years ago, a keynote speaker was there as not a theologian, well he was, but more as an historian. He was a senior research fellow at a prestigious university in ancient history. And so he said, it's historically verifiable that an humility revolution took place in the first century. That prior to Jesus, the idea of humility wasn't a virtue, it was a negative in the mind of the Greeks and the Romans. Strength and honor. Ever see Gladiator? Strength and honor. That was the virtue to pursue, the prized virtue. But then came the cross of Christ and everything changed. He says, our culture has become profoundly cruciform. That means it's been shaped by the cross, even though our culture has forgotten about Jesus. That impact still bears weight. Think about it. How do we like our heroes? We don't want our heroes running around telling us how great they are. We don't like that. We want them humble. We're drawn to accomplished people who generally put others before their accomplishments. And that's going back to Jesus. Before Mother Teresa's death years ago, a woman spent a summer with her missionaries of charity there in Calcutta. And she wrote about her experience, and she said that people often ask me what Mother Teresa was like. Sometimes they seem to wonder, like maybe she glowed in the dark or she had a halo or something. She was short, wrinkled, and precious, maybe even a little ornery, but like a beautiful, wise old granny. But there's one thing she said I never forgot, and that was her feet. Her feet were deformed. Each morning in worship, I would stare at them. I wondered if she had maybe contracted leprosy or something, but of course I wasn't going to ask her, hey, mother, what happened to your feet? One day a sister said, have you noticed her feet? And we all nodded, curious. She said, her feet are deformed because we get just enough donated shoes for everyone, and she doesn't want anyone to get stuck with the worst pair. So when they come in, she digs through and she finds them, the worst pair. And years of doing that have made her feet the way that they are. Years of loving her neighbor have deformed her feet. And I asked the first hour, what do you do with stories like that? You read stories like that. And they just leave me in the dust. I'm just brought low and realizing how far I have yet to go in this way of Jesus, this way of servanthood. This humble little psalm has been called a maintenance psalm. Because if you've walked with Jesus for any length of the road, you know you need maintenance. You need work. Eugene Peterson again says that Christian faith needs continuous maintenance. It requires attending to. If you leave anything alone, you leave it to a torrent of change. If you leave a white post alone, it'll soon be a dusty, dark post. Jesus said, I'm the vine, you're the branches. And a branch that produces fruit, he doesn't leave it alone, he prunes it so that it becomes even more fruitful. So Peterson says the psalm is practical to the person of faith, just as pruning is practical to the gardener. It gets rid of that which looks good to those who don't know any better and reduces the distance between our hearts and their roots in God. And those are the first two words, my heart. My heart, that's the issue, isn't it? What's inside of us? Because we can pretend, we can put on an exterior and appear. False modesty is just pride playing dress up. We can appear, but the heart is where that maintenance, that pruning needs to happen. I just read an article a few days ago entitled, You Can't Worry Your Way to Peace. You ever try that? You can't worry your way to peace. The author's a man by the name of Stephen Cuss, C-U-S-S. He writes this. He says, I was on an early morning flight after spending the prior afternoon and evening staring at a screen of delayed flights. I was sleep deprived and a little on edge after a long time away from home, but that's still no excuse for what happened next. The plane landed and the seatbelt sign went off, and the family behind me jumped up and rushed down the aisle, and the teenager skipped past me. Now, he says, in the Cuss family, no one skips the line. And so he says, like Gandalf, I threw my hand across the aisle like saying, you shall not pass, kind of thing. And turned around and said to the dad and the mom there that, hey, we all want to get off the plane. Let's take our turns. He said the dad lived up to my last name, shared a few words, and pushed right on through. And he says, I was fuming. And my seat partners there were also upset. He says, as I got off the plane, the flight attendant pulled me aside and said, that teenager that bolted out was having a panic attack. And her parents were just trying to get to her. So they weren't being rude. They were scared and desperate. All right. So I read this article. About 3 hours later, I'm going through McDonald's. If you don't know the etiquette here, let me just kind of fill you in. If you go to McDonald's, there's a single line. You wait your turn. And then it breaks off. You know what I'm talking about? It breaks off into these two kiosks where you can order. So it's a long line. We're waiting in line 3 hours after I read this article. And The guy in front of me is right about ready to break off, right? Somebody skips the line and scoots right in front of him. Well, he pulls right out, right behind her, lays on the horn, leans out with a certain gesture. But I want you to know I didn't do either of those things on the outside. Kind of the interesting thing here is I was behind him then as he's paying, so he pulls up to the cashier, and I can see him hand his card or attempt to hand his card. They have some conversation. He never gives his card, never gives any money, and then pulls forward and gets his food. All I can think is that the person that cut him off paid for his lunch. I don't know. But what hit me and what got my attention was my own reactivity. This is 3 hours after I read this article. I kind of soaked it in, got to spend some time in prayer about it. 3 hours later, I am triggered because somebody cut in line. And your trigger, I don't know what your triggers are, disrespect or unfairness, whatever your trigger is, it's bound to happen. And we react. And when you react, you lose a sense of connection to my better self, or the self that I know Christ is trying to build within me. I lose a connection with the others, with the person that cuts me off, as well as God. I need maintenance of the heart. That's the whole point of this. And I need it day in and day out. I need it, moment to moment. What do you do about reactivity, though? Is there anything to do? David says, it's what I do instead of. He says, instead of. My eyes aren't lofty. They're not haughty. My thoughts aren't preoccupied with my own greatness, my competitive edge or advantage. I don't fantasize with envy about people who I think are superior to me. I don't look down on people who I imagine are beneath me. Humility really is just honest. It's just being truthful. It's just bold honesty, self-honesty. In Romans 12, verse 3, Paul's talking about spiritual gifts. These are your spiritual capacities, your capabilities that God has given you. And if there's ever a time or a place where we're apt to maybe lose our sense of balance there, our sense of honesty, it would be with our capabilities, where we might become proud or boastful or whatever. And he says in that context, don't think of yourself as more highly than you ought or better than you are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourselves. How? Measuring yourselves by the faith God has given us. How do you measure yourself? Not in comparison to others, but realizing the fact that even my best capabilities, where I'm most apt to maybe feel a little boastful or prideful, are gifts. You use them, you don't deny them, but you can't take credit for them. They come from God. Everything good comes from God. And so there's that faith. Humility is fed by that kind of awareness. And so David says, here's what I do instead. I've stilled and quieted my soul. Like a weaned child with its mother, like a weaned child is my soul within me. What's the picture? Moms, what's an unweaned baby do when they're hungry or wet? They scream. And they cry. And then they treat you really as just a means to an end. Kind of like saying, you give me what I want and maybe I'll stop. Maybe. The weaned child, here's the picture, sitting contentedly in the lap of the parent. And they're secure, they're loved, and they're just happy to be there. They're just happy to be in the lap of the parent. See, humility isn't a virtue to pursue. It's an unconscious result of being in the lap of the Father. Or as late Tim Keller used to say, it's honest contentedness or contented honesty, where you know at a gut level that you are more wicked than you ever believed, and yet at the same time you are more accepted and loved than you ever dared dream. In a sense, David is saying you can't pursue humility to become humble. You pursue God, and humility sneaks up on you as you humble yourself before Him and as you serve others. And here's the thing. This transition from a screaming spiritual infant to a contented child of God doesn't happen overnight. And you can read an article, and 3 hours later, it's right in front of you, and you get triggered. But David says, I've quieted my soul. How do you quiet your soul? How do you relax in the presence of God? Before you leave this room, before you leave this building, you might be triggered. You might be. You get caught up in yourself really easily. What do? The author of that article, he said, how do I relax in the Lord's presence? It isn't difficult, but it does take intentionality. And he suggested this. He said, maybe this will help you notice, but also diffuse that reactivity. Open your phone. If you got a phone like this, open your phone, go to your calendar, and maybe look on there, see maybe you've got a meeting or you've got an interaction with a difficult situation that might trigger you, might trigger some reactivity. And in that memo line, you type in these words in caps. God is with me, God is ahead of me, and God is with us. And then you set the alarm. So maybe a half hour, hour before that event or before that meeting, this pops up. And you take a moment and you rehearse that reality. And you realize that this room that you're going to walk into, God was there ahead of you. And this difficult person that might trigger you, He's with them as He is with you. And the author says, this has done wonders for my own reactivity, Mr. Gandalf here. I've used it before I walk out to preach, when I start a meeting, when I find myself trying to worry my way to peace. Ever found yourself, like my situation there, where I was just kind of disgusted with myself? And maybe you look at your own reactivity and you almost throw in the towel. You go, here I am again. And is there any hope, right? Is there any hope? Or is this just the way I am? I'm just going to, make the best. Verse 3, put your hope in the Lord. Get your eyes off yourself, put your hope in the Lord. And the words of God to Moses, doesn't matter who you are, I am. Put your hope in the Lord, because this change of heart is an inside job that is impossible for you, but not the Lord. So you hope in Him. And day in and day out, you put your hope, he says, both now and forevermore, moment to moment. And you count on God leading you into a sphere or an opportunity to follow in Jesus' steps. This God who so served you and loved you, He's going to allow you a chance to serve someone else. And not just for their good, but for your good. We're doing this thing, Serve Janesville. Heard about it? Maybe? You're going to walk out to your car. You're going to walk by a table. Has some opportunities there. And they're not just opportunities to serve Janesville. They're opportunities for us, for God to work on us and through us. We could use some more people. Think about it. Pray about it. Stand right now, if you would, and commit yourself to Jesus by putting these words right over your heart right now. And then bow with me, if you would. First of all, God with me. God with me. Father, you at the birth of Jesus, you said that His name will be called Emmanuel, God with us. And we know that through your Holy Spirit that you are indeed, this isn't just these aren't just words. For anyone who walks with Jesus, we walk with you. You walk with us. You are with us. And you never leave us and forsake. No matter how many times we're triggered and fail, you don't bail on us. And God, you're ahead of us. There's not a moment or an interaction where you aren't in the room first, or in the line, or wherever we are. Teach us, God, how to sit contentedly in your lap. Teach us how to worship you so that we might serve you. And God, you are with us. You aren't just with me. You're trying to help me see the people that I interact with, maybe even the person that cuts me off in line, as somebody that you love. You're with us. And when I serve them, I'm actually serving you. You oppose the proud, but you give grace to the humble, and we need grace every day. And God, you are our creator and savior of our souls, but you're also the maintainer. May we abide in you through Jesus. Amen. So receive this. 1 Peter chapter 5. And this is a benediction, but also a calling for us. When you get up tomorrow morning and you put on your clothes, he says, all of you remember to dress yourselves in humility as you relate with each other. For God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. So humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, and at the right time he will lift you up. But cast all of your cares upon him, all of your worries, because he cares for you. Amen. Love to pray with you. Jimmy and I will be here.